The Resident Evil Outbreak games contain many terrifying enemies with some very disturbing origins, from human experiments gone horribly wrong, to a murderous axeman with a haunting past, all the way to the nightmarish animal mutations. The dark truth behind this roster of creatures will give you chills. Sit back as we explore the lore of every Resident Evil Outbreak enemy.
Resident Evil Outbreak.
The Hunter R is a variant of the bioengineered Hunter species. Intended as the next step in Hunter development, the R model replaced the Alpha model in its development. The reason for this was to increase usability of Hunters, as the practical applications for the previous Alpha model were considered to be somewhat limited. These creatures were noticeably an ectothermic species, being cold-blooded and heavily dependent on the climate to assist in their metabolism. It is also understood that this species was smaller and weaker than any other Hunter products, though made up for it in pack instinct. This particular variant Hunter was developed in the Nest facility under William Birkin and another Umbrella USA facility located above ground. After William Birkin became infected with the Golgotha virus and went on a wild rampage, numerous Hunter Rs were released, killing a number of Umbrella researchers before the temperature controls were lowered. The Hunters, unable to continue killing in freezing temperatures, froze in their tracks, leaving them still statues scattered around the facility. Shortly after this occurred, a group of survivors consisting of Yoko Suzuki, George Hamilton, and Alyssa Ashcroft entered the facility, looking for a way out of Raccoon City. While exploring the area, they were eventually forced to bring the facility's indoor temperature back up to be able to use the turntable elevator to escape Nest, which caused the Hunters to become unfreezed and pursue the survivors. Yoko and her group eventually managed to take out the many Hunter Rs and flee the facility. G is the name given to any mutant created through the infection process of the Golgotha virus. The process is as follows. A host is injected with the Golgotha virus, causing the body to become impregnated with an embryo. The body then rejects the embryo due to incompatibility with its DNA, resulting in a very savage and gory escape from the body, usually resulting in its host body being split in two. This occurs because the genetic incompatibility between G and the host was insurmountable, causing the G cells to forcefully reproduce and spread throughout the body in a process known as false reproduction, which ultimately resulted in the G adult body. The adult mutation then has the ability to spew G young babies out of its body, which attack and infect the enemy, potentially resulting in more G adults being created. The only known occurrence of Gs was during the Raccoon City destruction incident that took place in September of 1998. Monica, a researcher of the G virus R&D team, was parasited by a G embryo that crawled down her throat when she was attacked by a giant moth in the nest. Not genetically compatible, it rejected Monica and tore out her chest. The creature matured into its adult form within minutes, but was soon killed by a group of survivors on the surface. The Leech Man was a mass of T-virus infected leeches that used an infected body as a means of movement. Only one is known to have existed, being located in the Raccoon General Hospital in September of 1998. The Leech Man and similar mounds of leeches in the outbreak are comparable to mimicry Marcuses, though they function differently. During the outbreak, an unidentified strain of the T-virus made its way through the sewers of Raccoon City in the weeks leading up to Operation Nestwrecker. One of the mutants resulting from this localized outbreak was the giant leech, which later asexually produced a colony of its own. These leeches were studied by Umbrella USA, who noted their tendency to stick together to form large bodies, drawing comparisons with reports of the mimicry Marcuses. As the outbreak spread, the leeches made their way into the hospital itself and began directly feeding on people, particularly hunting those with wounds. One such victim was Dr. Hirsch, whom the leeches completely covered and killed while blood draining. Rather than leave his body behind, the leeches clung to him to maintain their shape, using his body like a puppet to move around faster. Ultimately, a group of survivors had trapped the creature in a room and set it on fire, ridding the hospital of its most terrifying creature. The giant leech was a leech infected with the T-virus that took residence within the waterways beneath the Raccoon General Hospital. Apparently different from the leeches James Marcus was working with, this leech was, like its smaller kin, extremely sensitive to fire. During the outbreak, a group of survivors attempted to escape the hospital by using the sewer, unaware of the giant leech's presence. They accidentally rammed it with a boat, causing it to become enraged and attack. Ultimately, the survivors proved victorious and defeated the creature. The Suspended is the name given to an unnamed civilian who was infected with the T-virus during the outbreak. Following her zombification within the Apple Inn, she underwent a freak mutation into a variant of the liquor, but retaining a more human form, keeping features such as human eyes, hair, and a lack of exposed brain tissue. Like the other liquors, Suspended is still capable of climbing and hanging on ceilings as a means of hunting, and is still able to use its tongue as a weapon. In terms of strength, Suspended actually exceeds that of normal liquors. It's worth noting that the English localization of this creature's name is Regus Liquor. Regus comes from the Latin word rex, meaning king or ruler. Regus Liquor would therefore read in English as King of Liquor. Throughout the Raccoon City destruction incident, only one Suspended was ever confirmed to exist. This suggests the creature was a freak mutation unique to the victim. When a group of survivors were looking for a way out of the Apple Inn Hotel, the creature ambushed them, entering into a fierce battle with the group. Ultimately, the group of survivors were able to defeat the creature and escape the hotel. The Tyrant C was a prototype Tyrant model which saw action during the outbreak. Its precise origins are unknown, though it appears to have been produced following completion of the T-103 model. The Tyrant C is characterized by its purple complexion, protruding facial horns, and red defense coat. This Tyrant model attacks by swinging its seemingly elasticated arms and kicking the character. While the Tyrant C was more powerful and dexterous than the T-103, it lacked adequate endurance and stamina. The elastic arm attack is instant death and should be avoided at all costs. Scissor Tails are a type of T-virus infected arthropod encountered during the outbreak. This creature uses its newfound abilities granted to it by the T-virus to hunt their prey, inducing bleeding and in some cases poisoning. There are two kinds of Scissor Tail, brown and blue, and both seem to have different capabilities. The brown Scissor Tail is the larger of the two types and will induce bleeding upon unsuspecting victims. The blue Scissor Tail, while slightly smaller, will induce poison and bleeding on its victims. Both types do this either by stabbing their prey using their sharp tails, or by tackling and biting their prey. Both types of Scissor Tails have mutated to the point where they have grown out of their wings. The wings, while present, are incapable of flight, as they did not scale well with the Scissor Tail's mass increase, and have seemingly wilted away. When they feel threatened, they will burrow underground and attempt to escape their attacker. According to a Raccoon Today article published in Raccoon City, campers in the nearby Arklay Mountains encountered one in early September 1998 that attacked their hunting dog, which spent 2 weeks in the veterinarian's care after the attack. Thanatos was a unique Tyrant specimen created by Rogue Umbrella Corporation scientist Greg Mueller. This creature was named after an entity in Roman mythology, which was the Greek god of death. Greg created Thanos using research and combat data on the T-103 model. However, he wanted a Tyrant optimized for killing and preferred the physical size of the prototype T-002 combat model. The test subject, upon exposure to Epsilon, was augmented to develop superhuman strength and agility. In its only known combat against trained military professionals, Thanatos demonstrated a resistance to small arms fire. It had considerably increased running speed and was capable of killing with blows to the head and impalement with its claw. Thanatos did, however, demonstrate two weaknesses in its activity. Firstly, it was sensitive to jolts of electricity and could be knocked out from them. Also, just like other Tyrants, its grafted animal heart was left exposed, making it a weak point for the creature. During the outbreak, Greg formed a partnership with Peter Jenkins at Raccoon University with the offer of helping him create a vaccine for the T-virus. Greg offered T-virus blood to Peter for him to use as a necessary sample to create the vaccine. Greg planned on getting his blood sample from Thanatos. However, Peter discovered that Greg was helping him create the vaccine purely due to a personal vendetta, and that Greg actually sought to use the cure as leverage against Umbrella. As such, Peter refused to continue researching with him, and thus T-blood from Thanatos was rendered useless. Thanatos, however, would not remain dormant. Shortly after, an Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service team was sent by Umbrella as part of Operation Emperor's Mushroom. The objective was to enter the grounds of the Raccoon University and retrieve the Tyrant, or if the creature was too strong to contain, kill it and retrieve the remains. The operation was ready to go ahead from 5:35 to 6:35 on October 1st of 1998, the very last moments available for the company. Already aware of Umbrella's intent, Greg released his creation with the intention of wiping out the team. Around the time of the mission's initiation, the UBCS team, composed of 5 mercenaries including Carl, Dustin, and Nikolai, made contact with the creature in the back square in the city. Keeping their distance, the team continued to open submachine gun fire and attempt to take it down. The tactic failed, and when Nikolai tried to collect T-blood from behind, the creature then went on a homicidal rampage, killing the groundside components of the team. Thanatos then carried off the body of one of the mercenaries, bringing it to Greg for his research purposes. As the creature ran out of sight, Nikolai began preparations for another encounter should it take place. Thanatos then proceeded to pursue a ragtag group of refugees throughout the university. It ultimately failed, and the survivors managed to escape its grasp. After Greg's assassination by Nikolai and the activation of the C4 charges, Thanatos again tried and failed to kill the survivors while they fled. While they escaped to the temporary safety of the back square, the C4 went off, destroying a section of the university building and bringing the ceiling down around Thanatos. Though this severely injured it and cost it an arm, it also caused it to mutate into its Super Tyrant form, known as Thanatos R. Thanatos' Super Tyrant mutation increased its height to over 12 feet tall and developed powerful muscles to allow it to jump high into the air. The mutation also formed a metal casing around its heart, making it much more difficult to take down. After its mutation, Thanatos resumed its chase for the survivors outside the university. As they made their way to the evacuation, Thanatos cut them off, engaging them in battle. The survivors were able to halt the creature for a few minutes as they fled to the front square of town. Shortly after, Thanatos got up and quickly resumed its chase at full strength. Meeting them at the front square, Thanatos intercepted the survivors for the third and final time. After a long and difficult battle, the survivors defeated the powerful creature and escaped the city.
Resident Evil Outbreak File 2.
The zombie elephant is the product of an elephant succumbing to T-virus infection. Currently, only one zombie elephant has been known to have existed, that being a raccoon zoo attraction named Oscar. In the past, Oscar was the star attraction of the raccoon zoo, and many people gathered to see most of his performances at the elephant stage. In the Elephant Keeper's Diary file, we learn that there used to be a big elaborate parade at the zoo, in which they outfitted elephants in Christmas lights up until about 15 years ago. Oscar was the star of that parade for many years. Unfortunately, not long after the T-virus spread throughout the city, Oscar became infected. Now the zombie elephant rampages through the zoo and surrounding streets, indiscriminately attacking anything in its path. The elephant's body reacted to the T-virus infection through increased size, strength, and aggression. While this may be the only known case of an infected elephant, there is no reason against other elephants reacting in a similar way. Infected elephants may also consume flesh, suggested by Oscar's attacks on the survivors with its mouth. The infected elephant's increased size led to a restriction of movement, slowing down the speed at which it could run. Oscar also showed visual difficulties, resorting to using his ears instead to attack his victims. During the earliest days of the Raccoon City incident, a band of survivors attempted to cross through the zoo to reach an evacuation point on the other side. The elephant followed them, collapsing the entrance and trapping them inside, before pursuing them throughout the zoo. The elephant was contained once survivors restored power and lured it into the elephant stage before closing the gate, trapping it inside. Eventually breaking free, it encountered the survivors one last time on the streets of Raccoon City. The beast's eyes burned with a furious intensity as it charged, shaking the ground beneath its colossal weight. After a difficult battle filled with harrowing close calls and strategic maneuvers, the survivors finally managed to put the elephant to rest. Zombie hyenas are hyenas infected with the T-virus. Unlike other infected mammals such as the zombie elephant, zombie hyenas experienced increased agility and aggression, allowing them to easily dodge bullets. They themselves are more comparable to zombie dogs, whom they are more distantly related to. Fortunately, these animals are easily stunned by bullets and other kinds of damage. Throughout the zoo, the survivors will encounter these creatures outside the buildings, and they will normally be in packs. The alligators at Raccoon Zoo were another species that fell victim to the T-virus, mutating uncontrollably and attacking anyone who swims in their path. These infected alligators experienced increased size, strength, and aggression, making this creature quite the formidable foe. They choose not to leave their lake home, but instead attempt to bite any victims near the lake shores or in the water, making it quite a challenge to traverse across their habitat. The Hornbill is a tropical bird that was exposed to the virus at the zoo. These creatures behave very similarly to the zombie crows from previous games. They fly around the survivors and perform a lunge attack when the time is right, infecting the survivor in the process. Hornbills, as with the crows, do not appear to have suffered noticeable mutations from the T-virus, though are considerably more aggressive in their infected state, making them very dangerous and pesky opponents. The zombie lions are the last infected zoo animal from the enemy roster, and quite possibly the most dangerous. Throughout the zoo, the survivors will encounter a few female lions named Sylphie and Jennifer, along with one male lion named Max. These creatures went through a small degree of mutation following exposure to the virus. Primarily, the males and females experienced an increase in size brought on by an overproduction of hormones. They also experienced heightened aggression, as well as improved strength and agility. Like many other animals infected by the virus, rapid muscle growth has occurred, tearing through the skin and exposing muscle and flesh. Megabites were a species of mutant flea which emerged during the Raccoon City destruction incident. At least one colony is known to have existed, being located in the subway station of Raccoon City. These creatures arose as a result of fleas consuming blood contaminated with the T-virus strain. Rather than live on the body of an animal, adults are known to form their own nests, and have even been known to drag human prey to the nest for further consumption. While Megabites' eggs and larvae have not been seen, pupa found at the subway station indicates that they were indeed capable of reproduction. Adult megabites emerge from their pupa at roughly a foot in length, and will remain at this size until they consume a large quantity of blood to trigger further growth. A well-fed megabite can grow to be as much as 3 feet long, making it quite the terrifying encounter. The Giga Bite was an enhanced version of the Megabite flea species. It lived in the subway tunnels around South Raccoon Street Station as part of a nest populated by smaller megabites. Its exact relationship with the megabites in its nest is uncertain, whether it was their mother, a more successful megabite, or even a megabite which experienced a rare case of hypergrowth mutation. Regardless of the case, it proved to be quite the challenge for a group of survivors in the subway. Upon entering the train, the Gigabite kidnaps one of the survivors, causing the others to pursue it deep into the dark subway system. After a tough battle, the 3 survivors are ultimately able to defeat the enemy, finally ridding the subway station of its deadliest creature. Green zombies were a plant/zombie hybrid encountered in the Arklay Mountains in 1998. When the abandoned hospital within the mountains was taken over by mutated plants, the saplings of these plants would emit a toxic gas that would infect any human that walked in its path, causing these humans to become infected and mutate uncontrollably, having the effects of normal zombies while having plants, roots, and vines entangled throughout their body. While bodily identical to any other zombies, green zombies were protected by the plants and would release a poisonous fog if anyone gets too close, making them a deadly encounter within the halls of the Arklay Hospital. The Hunter Moo was a smaller version of the Hunter R. Several of these creatures were held in storage in the Umbrella Research Facility. This Hunter has the exact same attacks and firepower resistance of the larger Hunter R. These creatures may have been designed for an easy-to-store Hunter that could be delivered in large quantities for any emergency situation that could occur. They were a sizable threat to the survivors hiding in the facility until Carter, an Umbrella researcher, released Tyrant B to finally rid the facility of these creatures. Tyrant R was an experimental subspecies of the T-103 Tyrant, stored in the Umbrella Research Facility in Raccoon City, designed with programs as a means of control to replace analog methods such as the use of trainers. The Tyrant R received further genetic remodeling, strengthening, and reinforcement compared to previous models. By enhancing its genes, it was possible to create a substitute for the T-103 that maintained the ability to camouflage as a human, but with improved control and combat abilities, as well as an increased ability for threat perception and even some knowledge on stealth. Its durability was far greater than that of any other Tyrant, and even a rocket launcher would only knock it unconscious rather than blow it to pieces. The Tyrant was activated in the early hours of October 1st by Umbrella scientist Carter to combat the renegade of Hunter Moose roaming the facility. Just prior to the escape of the survivors in the lab, the Tyrant revealed its self-awareness, destroying the AT-1521 sample and knocking both Linda and the detonator for its internal bomb off a catwalk. After the lab was locked down due to the escape of the Hunter Moose, researcher Carter reprogrammed the Tyrant with the help of civilian survivors including David King. It then killed Carter and proceeded to hunt down the remaining survivors. After chasing the survivors through the ruined city and mutating into a more powerful stage, the Tyrant arrived at the highway overpass and was ready to attack David. This mutation was caused by the Tyrant losing its power limiter, causing the T-virus to become unrestricted and activate every cell in the Tyrant's body, starting with the skin. During its mutation, rock-like growths were formed on the skin, providing extra protection. Its speed dramatically increased due to cardiovascular improvement, to the point where it was difficult to see with the naked eye when sprinting. It grew large claws on each arm, just like a super Tyrant. Being experimental, this model had an explosive device placed in its neck to be detonated in the case something unforeseen transpired. Just when the Tyrant was about to attack David, Nyx, an enemy I will cover shortly, grabbed a hold of the Tyrant and absorbed the creature into its body. After a tough fight against Nyx, David was ultimately able to destroy the creature, causing the Tyrant to be set free again. Not long after David and Linda flee in an abandoned UBCS truck, the creature then confronts Ada Wong, another fleeing survivor who happened to stumble upon the scene while trying to find her way out of the city. She would remark that the creature was clever but predictable, and after a lengthy battle, she managed to defeat it and flee Raccoon City. Not long after the battle, his body was completely obliterated along with Raccoon City by missiles. Nyx was an experimental bioweapon stored in an Umbrella-owned dockyard awaiting transport. It was named after Nyx, the Greek goddess of the night. This grotesque mutation was created via unspecified viral augmentation and genetic modification, and had the ability to alter its physical form through the incorporation of organic matter, as well as absorb enemies into its body with tentacles. By October 1st of 1998, Umbrella HQ became aware of plans to destroy the city, and ordered its 2nd USS squad to recover Nyx from the dockyards and evacuate it with a Chinook. Captain Rodriguez betrayed the company and planned to keep the BOW for himself. As Rodriguez was flying away, Umbrella executive Tommy Nielsen fired at his helicopter with a UBCS rocket launcher. While Rodriguez's quick reflex allowed him to avoid death, the crate dropped into the highway below, releasing the BOW inside. When this cargo crate landed, a team of UBCS soldiers approached the crate in hopes to secure it, only for every single soldier to be slaughtered and absorbed by Nyx, the creature inside the crate. Shortly after, it absorbed Tyrant R and battled against a group of survivors in its new mutated form. The survivors managed to defeat the creature, ridding Umbrella of quite possibly its most terrifying and dangerous creation. Albert Lester, or the Axeman, is a murderous stalker enemy that roams the abandoned halls of the Arklay Hospital. The tragic past behind this man gets very dark and is destined to leave a chill down your spine, as it is one of the darkest stories within the Resident Evil series. Before the outbreak, Albert Lester was the director of a hospital in the Arklay Mountains. Starting in 1993, Dr. Lester began accepting bribes from Dr. Greg Mueller to illegally trial an experimental virus on cancer patients. This virus was a strain of the T-virus that specifically targeted and removed cancerous cells. During this time, Albert's wife Dorothy Lester was suffering from an unspecified heart condition, which caused significant strain on her body, leaving her bedridden in the Arklay Hospital. Desperate to save his dying wife, Albert agreed on the illegal experimentation trial in hopes that it would cure his wife. The first test subject of the experiment was a 63-year-old man named Doug Frost, who was administered the virus on March 14th. Fortunately, his cancer cells died from the virus. However, this came with some side effects, as Doug began to develop a ferocious appetite. This side effect ultimately led to his death just a few days later. Still adamant on saving his wife, Albert put Dorothy on trial shortly after. Infected with the virus on the 20th of May, Lester's heart problems went away after a day and she was able to breathe on her own. On the 23rd of May, Lester began showing symptoms consistent with zombification and was noted in reports for her ferocious appetite. At some point in 1993, when patients started dying frequently in the ArcLight Hospital, a journalist by the name of Kurt was certain that illegal experimental drugs were being tested on patients within. He was determined to uncover the truth, causing him to take matters into his own hands and visit the hospital, not knowing the nightmares that awaited him inside. Upon entering the hospital, he encountered a zombified Dorothy Lester. With the side effects taking full control of Dorothy, she grabbed Kurt and proceeded to eat him alive. His colleague Alessa, a young and ambitious rookie at the time seeking to make a name for herself, had followed Kurt to the hospital, arriving only to witness his death. Terrified, Alyssa fled, escaping and repressing the traumatic memory, forgetting the hospital and seeing Kurt's death entirely. With the disappearance of Kurt, the police had arrived not long after and shut the hospital and its operations down. However, Dr. Lester and his colleagues were able to avoid charges due to Umbrella's influence over the Raccoon Police Department. It wasn't long after that when Dorothy had succumbed to the side effects of her infection and passed away, with her body being left in storage in the ICU. While stored away, a massive plant became heavily mutated from exposure to the experimental T virus and eventually consumed Dorothy. Over the years, Dr. Lester developed a habit of returning to the hospital, unable to move on with his life. In the hospital's intensive care unit, he discovered a mutant plant growing on the wall. He became obsessed with the plant's care, thinking of it as Dorothy's reincarnation to the point of hearing her voice coming through it. Dr. Lester began killing birds and dogs around Raccoon Forest and feeding them to the plant for nourishment, wearing a hood and armed with an axe. These acts from Lester received local attention and eventually made it to the news. September 6, 1998. A ghost? Sightings of a mysterious masked figure in the ArcLight Woods are on the rise. The bloody remains of crows and wild dogs have also been showing up near riverbanks in the area. The whole region has been swept up in the hysteria, and a mood of fear and paranoia is prevalent. Longtime residents insist that it's the ghost of a patient from the nearby hospital that closed down 5 years ago. Are these bizarre sightings just a taste of things to come? By March 1998, he expanded to killing trespassers or lurking hikers and carried them to the hospital, where he would then carve them up and feed them to the plant. The botanist notebook file found in the game shares a diary of 2 hikers caught by Albert Lester. March 15th. I can hardly explain my surprise at finding this abandoned cabin. The strong vines, the gigantic tropical flowers. I was convinced that I had discovered a new species. March 18th. Rick and I decided to set up camp right here so we could begin research and take samples. It is imperative that this site remain secret. March 19th. This is no good. The plants seem to possess a will of their own. They move as if controlled by intelligence. They have blocked the only door to the cabin. March 20th. There is no way out of this place. If it comes down to it, I can use my satellite phone as a last resort. We have a week's worth of food left. It's best to just wait for now. Rick swears up and down that he can sense a human presence here. He's likely hallucinating. Meanwhile, I managed to drop my phone and break it. I no longer care about the new plant species. I just want to get out of here. Rick is dead. He was killed. Who is that freak? Why is he attacking us? Bianca Jesse, please forgive your father for dying before you. I'll always love you. As the months went by, he continued with his lifestyle and would eventually become infected from the plant he was feeding, causing him to begin mutating. A diary from Lester found in the abandoned hospital better explains his mutation experience, telling us stories of his encounters with his hopeless victims deep in the woods. The first mention was a group of 3 kids that went camping. These kids were lost, so Lester offered to guide them, ultimately tricking them to go deeper into the woods, where he eventually slaughtered them. Another encounter he shared was an evening hiker taking a walk. Lester stalked him throughout the woods until he went in to murder him. The hiker fought back by pulling out a shotgun and getting off a few good blasts before Lester ultimately took him down, dragging him back to the hospital to be fed to the plant. He then talks about the mutation effects of the body, claiming that nothing causes physical pain anymore, that he doesn't feel heat or cold anymore, and no longer gets hungry, thinking himself to be inhuman. Lester's violent actions in the area reached press attention in early September due to the witness reports of him walking around Raccoon raccoon forest with an axe, along with other reports as to the number of bird and dog carcasses dumped into the river. His supply of victims was slowed down by this point due to the mountain roads being closed off. When the T-virus spread into Raccoon City's water supply later that month, refugees began fleeing into the mountains, which gave him a new supply of victims. One of these refugees was Alyssa Ashcroft, the woman who saw her colleague Kurt get eaten alive years prior at the hospital. Albert greeted the survivors at the old cabin in the woods, claiming it's easy to get lost in the woods and that he would help guide the group through the woods to reach the neighboring town. With no other options, the group decided to trust him as he began guiding them deeper and deeper into the woods, tricking them to enter the abandoned hospital, where he then put on his mask, grabbed his axe, and began pursuing the group through the hospital halls with the intent on chopping them up and feeding them to the massive plant. Alyssa and her group were able to evade the stalker and eventually defeat the massive plant, which caused the hospital to fall apart. While the survivors fled the building, Albert decided to return to the plant, where he then found his wife's preserved body. Ultimately, he was crushed to death by falling debris while he held the corpse in his arms, ending the tragic tale of Albert Lester. Click this video here to find out the disturbing lore of every enemy from Resident Evil Revelations. Thank you for watching.